Hello, my name is Dan Johnson and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about my vinyl collection from mostly Big Finish Productions, but we also have a couple of soundtracks to get through today. I have realised when I did my video back in January talking about my Big Finish collection that I basically skipped a ton of audios and just sort of went through the vinyls and just showed you the cover art, when there's a lot more to get into, because a lot of these releases have not just art on the discs themselves, or on the records themselves rather, but they also have individual cover art, which is something that Big Finish hasn't done a massive amount of in recent years. So I have my stand set up, as you can see, spared no expense, and I have myself from the future ready to show off the artwork of these releases. There's a lot to talk about, so sit down, have a coffee or a Coke or something, and I hope you enjoy the video. First up, we have the soundtrack for Series 1 and 2. This record is also orange with a Gallifreyan design in the middle. Not what I would have gone for with this series. I feel like this series is more of a blue in my mind, or something along those lines, but it's quite a striking item to have in your hand. There are so many tracks on here that are iconic to Doctor Who fans, and you also have a lot of artwork on the right hand side. Up next, we have the soundtrack for Series 5. Again, really iconic music, and I think I gave into a little bit of childhood nostalgia with this one, and spent a lot more than I probably normally would do on a vinyl in order to get this. Sorry to talk over myself, but I actually didn't realise there are 3 different colours in this set. So we have a dark blue, a purple one that looks like the ooze from Power Rangers, and then a much lighter blue one. I really do think it was worth it. They don't seem to have a Series 3 one or a Series 4 one. Well, not to my knowledge that they do. They might do and have just released it before I even had the turntable, but I was really happy to get these two. I think these are probably some of the most iconic ones. I would love to see more come out. I'd definitely buy them. A Series 3 one, for example, would be amazing. I think I got these from the Demon Music Group, so I just had to keep an eye out on their website to see if there have been more, although I may be a complete idiot and they just passed me by. This next release is the only one that I own of this range. I think I also bought this from the Demon Music Group. It is The Pirate's Planet. This is a narrated story of the Pirate Planet by Douglas Adams. It has the most glorious disc art I've ever seen. It's a really beautiful piece of craftsmanship. And do you know those videos, I would suggest Googling it if you haven't already, of how these things are made, where they kind of have this sort of splodge of colour and then they squish it down and each one is then unique. It's a really lovely disc art to have. I have to confess though, I've never watched the story because it's part of season 16 and I'm waiting for the collection box set. But I've also never listened to this vinyl all the way through, I'm ashamed to say. And now we begin the proper Big Finish stuff. First up, we have Time Lord Victorious, Echoes of Extinction. This was a conclusion, I believe, to the Time Lord Victorious arc. It is told in 2 parts. So as you can see right now is part 1 or part 2 with David Tennant. I think you can interchange them. I don't think it matters which way you listen to them. What's quite interesting about this release is that you get a disc that is more or less split in 2 in terms of its colours. So on one side of the disc you have a purpley colour that we saw with David Tennant's side, and on this side you have more of a blue colour representing the 8th Doctor's side of the story. As you can see, this disc is pretty cool because it is split, one half red and one half blue. I think it looks really cool. It would have been nice if the red was more of a purple to represent Paul McGann's cover on the artwork. It's a really interesting idea as a release. It's a release I've not listened to in a very long time, but I definitely need to listen to it again. And now we go into one of my favourite sagas from Big Finish, and that is Dalek Universe. I thought this thing was absolutely incredible. It's also the reason that I got into buying vinyls and ended up buying a few albums to complement this little collection that I've been growing. This saga is made of 9 episodes, and we're going to get straight into them. First up, we have Buying Time. As you can see, we have David Tennant there walking through flames, as well as Joe Sims' Mark 7 just behind him. This story has an absolutely incredible cliffhanger, which was resolved in the 2nd episode, entitled The Wrong Woman, which has a very artistic and intriguing design. And finally, this set is wrapped up with the House of Kingdom. Here, another gorgeous piece of artwork featuring the Mechanoids. Jane Slavin's there as Anya Kingdom, and of course David Tennant once again playing with a sonic screwdriver. Up next we have Dalek Universe 2, another glorious cover here. I think this may have been the one that made me buy the set in vinyl. I think it was. But it just hadn't been released at that point. So that was the first vinyl I ever received, but I think I ordered it because of this release. There was something about it that I just really, really loved. The first episode is called Cycle of Destruction, hence why Mark 7 is right at the front of the cover. The second story, The Trojan Dalek, I mean, do I need to say anything? I think the artwork for that one is absolutely glorious. I mean, it looks incredible in the viewfinder of the camera, and I hope it comes across well. But I mean, I would love to take these things to be signed if they weren't such a pain to carry around with you. I mean, wouldn't it look really cool with a little signature just down here or something like that? I think that would look absolutely incredible. It's a beautiful piece of artwork, and I think that's why I really, really wanted to have it physically and enlarged, because I knew I already had the CDs at this point, but I just wanted that really cool artwork in that scale. And finally, we have The Lost, which is a beautiful two-hander between the Doctor and Anya. I also think it has some of the best cover art of the entire range. I think the greyness, but having the blue of the Doctor's eyes and that portal right in the centre, I think, once again, a glorious piece of art. I think you can understand why I decided to buy the vinyls at this point. And then the final episode features Davros, as played by Terry Malloy, and Riversong there disguising herself as a Movellan, another epic piece of artwork. This set starts off with the first sun, which I think is another really nice cover. I mean, not my favourite, but I think the lines down at the bottom and that sort of composition of it really pops and makes David Tennant really stand out at the front. Plus, if you get your eyes close into that Dalek saucer, it does look really detailed. Is it Dalek saucer? That might not actually be a Dalek saucer, that might be a Movellan ship. Our second episode is the Dalek Defense, which of course features Davros. We have a really nice piece of artwork here. What I like the most about this one is that down at the bottom, I don't know how well this comes across in camera, but there's kind of this effect on it, almost like droplets and sort of smoke effect as well. And I think that really makes the vinyl image pop out. Of course, you have the really imposing, very detailed, very cool looking models of the Daleks front and centre. And finally, you have the triumph of Davros, the final story in this saga, wrapping up all 9 episodes together in a nice little bow. Once again, a really, really epic cover. I love the world down at the bottom and the way that it's sort of split in half and you have that blue and the red together. I think that I just love those sort of parallel elements in design. I think they look really, really good. This cover gets me excited for the story and gets me excited for the wild ride that we're about to go on. And now we go into the 9th Doctor's range with these vinyls. He probably has the most. I think we've got 8 box sets to talk about now. So we have Ravagers, which was the first one. I believe I bought this because I really like Dalek Universe, and even though these releases were already out, or this release was already out at this point, I decided that I really wanted to get these as well to sort of continued the collection. I tried to get a few others, but they were out of print. Spare Parts and Chimes of Midnight ring a bell. I can't think of any more, but I think they were just too difficult to get my hands on, and I didn't have thousands of pounds for eBay. So this was a really exciting release, and this is a 3-part story as written by Nicholas Briggs. Say what you like about the story. It is a story that is very complicated and very timey-wimey, but the more I've listened to it, the more I really understand it and the more I appreciate it. Out of a lot of box sets that I may listen to every once in a while, this set has, since it came out, has been a regular listen for me. I will just get a taste for it from time to time and go through the set. Episode 1 is entitled Sphere of Freedom. We have a really creepy robot at the front, a Roman, and down at the bottom you can see the TARDIS there being incorporated into the design with this really nice sort of explosion effect going on as well. And I think that's the thing you get with having the vinyl versions over the CDs, is that you can inspect them a lot closer and you can really make out the detail in the compositions and in the assets that they've used. Our next episode is Cataclysm, which is of course part 2. I love the way that the walkway draws your eye to those TARDIS doors, and the way that they've incorporated the TARDIS into the design is really nice. And finally, we have Food Fight, which is the final episode. We have some timer eddies to the right, we have the TARDIS on the left, and of course the TARDIS interior, as you can see just off the Doctor's ear. What I find really interesting about this release compared to a lot of the others that I've talked about and will talk about is that this release has artwork that needs to be really connected but also be really individual, so it feels like you're getting 3 individual covers. Although I have been staring at the Doctor's lapels for far too long, and now I'm starting to freak out because he hasn't got any shoulders. Are they even lapels? They're not lapels, because lapels are on your shoulder. His jacket then. The second box set was called Respond to All Calls, and I think this was more in line with what I wanted from the set that we got previously with Ravagers, because this gives you 3 individual stories that I'm going to get into that are very different from each other, and it really allows the Ninth Doctor to have more going on, in whereas in the previous box set he was really stuck in one setting. I actually listened to these episodes last week, so I have quite a lot to say. This first episode is called Girl Deconstructed. It's a really interesting and emotional story about the idea of rooms having ghosts and taking people away, and it's also centered around the relationship between a daughter and a father. Fright Motif is a really interesting story, not just because it has a really cool cover with that gorgeous bit of red coming through it, but because it's about anxiety in many respects. I found that quite an interesting and relevant part of the story. I also think the setting is really good and really fun. The characters are great. Yeah, I really enjoyed this one. Probably wasn't my favourite of the set and the favourite of the Ninth Doctor, but as a sort of run-around episode with a monster, I thought was pretty fun. The final episode is called Planet of the End. I think this is my favourite. This may even be one of my favourite Ninth Doctor adventures. I think it is just so incredibly crazy that I love it. It's full of really fun moments. There is some beautiful bits of imagery in here though that I adore, and a moment of triumph that feels so earned, because even now I've listened to it a few times, I still really love listening to it. It makes me feel good when that moment comes, when the music swells and everything like that. I also think Christopher Eccleston is giving an absolutely incredible performance in this episode. Up next, we have Lost Warriors, the third set, and my most anticipated set, because of course the Cybermen make an appearance. The first episode is called The Hunting Season. You'll have to forgive me for the fact that I've not listened to these stories in a very long time, but The Hunting Season was one that I remember to be really enjoying, particularly the villains, as you can see riding that horse. I felt the idea of sort of cannibalism was really interesting in this story. And then we have The Curse of Lady Macbeth, which is a story that I cannot remember a thing about, I'm afraid, but I feel like this story was one that Christopher Eccleston really wanted because of his history with the character of Macbeth. And finally, we have Monsters in Metropolis. This is my favourite story of the box set, as you can possibly imagine. This takes place during the filming of the film Metropolis, which is one of the biggest sci-fi films ever made. It, of course, features the Cybermen, and I find this one really interesting because the take on the Cybermen is, I think, one of the best takes we've had on them in a very long time. Obviously, I won't spoil it, but I found this whole story really emotional. Having talked about these, I realised that I definitely need to listen to this box set again. And then the final box set, entitled Old Friends, features the Brigadier, Warren Brown, from the Unit box sets that I really adored and I've got all of. And of course, the Cybermen are back. They did something quite clever with this one, is that on release day, we didn't know the Cybermen were in it until a updated cover came out with the Cybermen right on the front. The first story is Fond Farewell, which has a really interesting concept. I would like to point out, though, that those guys in suits on the left, they're not Autons. They're just the attendants of this funeral caretakers. This is a really interesting episode because you are able to attend your own funeral, which I found like a really interesting idea already, but there's also a sort of revisionist history of this person's life, and that leads to the conflict of the episode. The next episode is Way of the Buryman, and I really enjoyed this big two-parter with the Cybermen. Warren Brown's character in the Unit series was the one that I first encountered when I listened to Cyber Reality. He is the frontman for the first episode. I have to admit that as I went through these box sets out of order, I thought there was a lot more to be told about his past, and this episode inadvertently gives a little bit more context to that I really appreciated. Not enough where it feels just like an origin story for his character, but it's just sort of like a backdoor pilot in reverse for him to join unit. Of course, we have the Cybermen and we have the Brigadier, which are excellent additions to the story. The cliffhanger is also really good and ties into the previous box set. And finally, we have the fourth generation, which is the conclusion, not just to this box set and this Cyberman story, but the entire first series of Christopher Eccleston's run. It is a epic ride. There's tons of action. The characters are really good. Yeah, I really love this Cyberman two-parter. Plus, I mean, these covers are gorgeous. The Ninth Doctor returned for Back to Earth, which is the start of his second series, full of more interesting one-off adventures. The first story, entitled Station to Station, is a really, really good episode. You know, I said that the previous story in Response to All Calls was one of my favourite episodes. This is a very close second, if not equal to. I have just noticed, though, that this episode is written by the same guy as my other favourite episode, which is Timothy X. Atack. This story has it all. It has a really great monster that has to be spoken to in rhyme, and a companion that will just appear for one story, played by Indigo Griffiths. The next story, entitled The False Dmitri, takes place in Moscow in Russia. As you can see, it's got these very cool android creatures. I have to say, the red artwork, to my eyes with all these lights, kind of washes out the image, but it looks okay on the camera. I know I've said this a few times now, but this may actually be my favourite episode of the Ninth Doctor's Adventures, because it is a Tim Foley script. The episode is entitled Auld Lang Syne, and it is about a house that they visit year upon year on New Year's Eve, and the Doctor is trying to fix the situation, and he keeps inviting these characters back to the house every year, and you see how their lives have changed throughout the 80s. It's a really good story. I actually listened to this in bed in the early hours of New Year's Day this year, and I just love it. The character drama is absolutely excellent. The next box set is Into the Stars. After the Doctor being on Earth for the previous box set, this time he's going to be out into space, which is nice because the Ninth Doctor didn't do a massive amount of that in the TV show. In fact, he didn't do any of that. He never went further than that station, did he? God, I call myself a Doctor Who fan. First story is called Salvation 9. Now, this is a really interesting episode. Dan Starkey plays a lot of Sontarans, and they're all very funny, but it also has a lot of warmth and a lot of heart to it. The setting is glorious. The imagery is great with their sort of wooden armour. I really, really liked this one. It's a really great start to the box set. You're going to have to excuse my pronunciation of this next story. This is called The Last of the Zerosine. This is a really fun sci-fi adventure. It kind of goes from 0 to 100 in terms of sci-fi. Like, you get episodes that kind of try to make sort of like a middle ground where you get something that feels a bit more like Earth, but this one is like full out sci-fi. There's a creature, it needs help, the Doctor comes to save it. The artwork is again lovely. I really like the sort of two blue lines and those red sort of lens flare things along the side, plus the way that it colorizes the Doctor's face. It really adds a lot to that cover. And finally, we have a Break the Ice, which is a Jack Frost story. Once again, a Tim Foley script is absolutely incredible. This is a lot of fun. It is a great action story. The villain, played by Pip Torrens, is absolutely excellent as Jack Frost. It's really frightening, and once again it has that moment of triumph that I really enjoyed in that second box set. The next box set is called Hidden Depths, arguably I think one of the weaker ones out of the run, but we have had a really solid run for a very long time now, so we'll get into the first story, which is The Seas of Titan, which is, of course, a Sea Devil story. The Ninth Doctor meets the Sea Devils, and I really enjoyed this for the most part, although I felt like generally I would have liked a little bit more from this story than what it gives me. It feels like a footnote. It's ultimately forgettable, and maybe one of the weakest ones. It's one of those ones that I come back to every once in a while, listen to, and then I've forgotten it by the next day. The next story, called Lay Down Your Arms, is an interesting one. It is a historical figure who won a Nobel Peace Prize, whose name escapes me at the minute, but the idea is that they are at a spa, and the two fractions of people end up fighting each other, and it's the idea of solving this problem and solving the mind control. It's also one of the first times that the Ninth Doctor has a historical story in many respects, because the Doctor then follows this person's life and it feels very educational and teaching you about something that you've not heard before, although I really cannot remember who it is about. It'd be down at the bottom of the screen. After that bit of painful irony, we have Flat Pack. Now, this is a story I really love, not just because I love Livchenko, but because the concept of this story is really, really good. It's the IKEA of space. The idea is that you are not allowed to leave, and the entire place is designed to keep you imprisoned and to keep you wandering the shop over and over again. But it's also the idea of shops putting sweets by the till, so if you're hungry, you might be tempted to buy a chocolate bar or something on the way out. It's a really interesting story, this one. And now our final release is Shades of Fear. We have 3 really interesting stories once again, but what I would like to point out is how cool the colours are in that background. I think that there's beautiful bits of red and the green, and that skeleton at the front and centre is so detailed and looks so good. It's a really interesting cover, this one. The first story is called The Colour of Terror. It's a really interesting one because it's not just about sort of the color spectrum, but it's also about the idea of colors having some significance in terms of your emotional mood. And I found that a really interesting part of the story. There's also a lot of sciencey stuff in this story that I really liked, plus a little bit of nice character work for the lady in the middle there, but I can't remember her name. The next story is called The Blooming Menace, and this isn't outright comedy. It's a very, very funny script. It has a lot of really fun moments, and the concept behind it is very stupid and very silly, but I just adore it. Dave Hearn, I think, is an excellent actor in the Goes Wrong show and the play of the same name, and I think that he lends his voice so well to this story. And finally, we have Red Darkness, which wraps up the Ninth Doctor adventures on vinyl. Sadly, Series 3 never came into fruition. I believe they were too expensive to be made, and I presume the sales weren't as good as they hoped they'd be. We have a skeleton absolutely vibing at the front of this cover. I don't know why, I've just noticed that he looks like he's having a great time at a rave. But we also have Adam Martin on this cover, who I have done an interview with about this release, but also the release of the next story he's in, called The Green Gift. This story features the Russian Narada. They're a really fun villain in this story. There's a lot of sort of horror-ish moments. Callan and Doyle, as you can see on the cover there, are an excellent pairing. It's a really fun episode. That's the lot. That's the entire collection. Like I say, it's quite sad that it didn't amount to much else, but there is still Doctor Who vinyls being produced elsewhere. Today is Record Store Black Friday, which means there is a lovely 10th Doctor release coming out, narrated by David Tennant. I would love to get it. It looks like a lovely piece of artwork. And so thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you did enjoy this video. If you did, make sure you give it a like, subscribe if you're new. I do so many Big Finish reviews here on the channel, and you can find them all in a playlist that I'm sure I have linked during the video. We're going into December, and I have about 4 releases, I think, to talk about, plus a Christmas video. And of course we have The War Between the Land and the Sea that I plan to be doing videos on as well. So until next time, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you soon. Goodbye.